Okay, hello. My name's Stacey Wordsworth. I'm president of the Rural Press Club of Queensland, and a very warm welcome to you for our special National AgDay event featuring Alison Watkins, and I'll talk more about Alison very shortly. As I'm sure most of you will know, we moved to online events earlier this year when the true impact of COVID-19 began to be felt, and we've run a string of webinars since, but we're very much looking forward to a return to in-person events at Tattersalls very, very soon. And I'll have some details on what we have planned for next month a little bit later after we hear from Alison this afternoon. Before I begin to introduce Alison, I also want to thank our valued sponsors, McCullough Robertson Lawyers, Sun Super and CBRE for their ongoing support this year in what have been the most unusual of circumstances for a club which exists basically to hold in-person events to promote rural journalism. So it's been tricky. We sincerely appreciate the investment you make in us and in Queensland agriculture. But look, back to why we're here today. And as I mentioned, this is a special event to celebrate National Ag Day, something initiated by the National Farmers Federation in 2017. After research found some 83% of Australians would describe their connection with farming as either distant or non-existent. It could, of course, be argued COVID has helped to bring a much clearer focus to the importance agriculture plays in global health and global stability, but there's still little doubt this remains an issue, and it is something that is being worked on by leaders across our sector, not only by representative bodies, but by research and development corporations, corporate farming entities, food and processing businesses, and dedicated families and individuals who are really proud of Australian farming and committed to feeding and clothing the world. This is also a cause today's speaker, and I've mentioned her a few times now, Group Managing Director of Coca-Cola Amatil, Alison Watkins, has thrown her support behind as a member of the advisory committee to the NFF's Telling Our Story initiative. But I'll let Alison talk a little bit about that in just a moment. We are delighted to have Alison, one of the nation's foremost corporate leaders, join us today, and someone who has experience and ongoing visibility across the entirety of the agri-food supply chain. Alison grew up on a farm in Tasmania's Midlands and has a commerce degree from the University of Tasmania. She joined Coca-Cola Amatil as Group Managing Director in March 2014, and is also currently Non-Executive Director of the Centre for Independent Studies and the Business Council of Australia. Her previous roles included Chief Executive Officer of GrainCorp Limited and Berry Limited, the market leader in Australian juice, and Managing Director of Regional Banking at ANZ. Alison spent 10 years at McKinsey & Company and became a partner in the firm in 1996 before moving to ANZ as Group General Manager of Strategy. Alison has been a Non-Executive Director of Australia and New Zealand Banking Group Limited, of Woolworths Limited and Just Group Limited. She's a former Victorian President and National Board Member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors as well. Now, Alison is very happy to take questions today. We'll have an opportunity after her address to address some of those or respond to some of those. What you need to do to pose a question is click the Q&A box, which is at the bar across the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then type in your questions. If you could let us know your name and where you're from, that would be fantastic. And I'll endeavour to get through as many of those as I can in the time that we have this afternoon. So with that, Alison Watkins, welcome to the Rural Press Club of Queensland, and thank you so much for being here on National Ag Day.
Thanks very much, Stacey, and thanks to everyone who's part of this gathering and to the Rural Press Club of Queensland. I'm very glad to be joining. I'd be much rather at the Tattersalls Club with you all in person, of course, than joining you as I am virtually from Sydney, but I think we all understand, and it's fantastic that you've kept the program going. Of course, the Press Club has a very proud history, 40 years, and I think it does provide such a valuable forum to discuss, debate, plan for the future on important topics that matter to the people and industries, not only of rural Queensland, but rural communities around the country. So I hope I can make some contribution today. And of course, it's a significant day for agriculture. It's National Ag Day, when the Press Club recognises the valuable contribution that agriculture makes to the economic and social fabric of Queensland and Australia more broadly. And I'm excited by this year's goal. Hopefully you can see I'm wearing my badge, my I Love Farmers NFF badge, because the goal of this year's AgDay is all about starting a conversation between farmers and the community towards better connecting all Australians with agriculture and the people behind it. So with that in mind, I've been asked to share my experience and reflections on the challenges and opportunities that exist for Australian agriculture and the food sector, or the agri-food sector, if you put it all together. And definitely those opportunities, I'm sure, as we all see, they're great. But we need to be bold to go after them and really fully realise those potentials. So I'll organise my thoughts into three areas. First of all, there's the sort of current situation that we're in, and the challenges and opportunities that we have as an agri-food sector. The second theme is around the critical importance of a really adaptive food supply chain that better connects with the needs of consumers, of the end consumer. And then I'll outline 5 main themes that I think are really important for the future of our agri-food sector to realise that full potential. So just very briefly, Stacey already gave you, I'm very sorry, the long version of my bio, but you can see from that food and agri-food have been, farming have been consistent themes throughout my life. I did grow up on a sheep farm. My first paid jobs, I think, were being was as a rouseabout in our shearing shed, and then I was on the tractor, doing quite a lot of tractor work in preparation for cropping back then, when it did involve a lot more tractor work than it probably does today. And I, at the moment, enjoy nothing more than getting home most weekends, COVID accepted, to our farm in southwest Victoria, where with my husband Rod, we have a property there, and we raise Black Angus cattle and grow some wheat and canola. So I feel really fortunate, you know, that I've been able to stay connected with the land in every sense, and certainly throughout my career, it's been a wonderful privilege to have some of those roles that I've held at ANZ, running Berry Limited, CEO of GrainCorp, and my current role. They definitely keep me connected with agriculture and food. So let me just turn on to the challenges and opportunities, and just a recap as I see it around the opportunity for agri-food for Australia. So I think it's clear that these are absolutely natural strengths for us as a country, but we've probably been a bit slow, I would say, in doing as much as we could, and we certainly need to, in order to drive growth. So back in 2015, I had the opportunity to chair the Business Council of Australia's Agriculture and Food Manufacturing Steering Committee. We put together a task force there of a really good group of people to look at the agri-food sector and what we needed to do to realise the potential. And it was identified following the release of a report by the BCA the prior year that was all about building Australia's comparative advantages. And what that did was went through and identified industries and value chain components where Australia was globally competitive or had the potential to be. And McKinsey and Company, who did that work, found that agriculture was what they described as an advantaged performer, and food manufacturing had latent potential. So we set about in this task force working out what needed to happen to realise that. McKinsey pointed to the strong growth in global food demand, which back then was expected to increase by, I think it was 77% by 2050. And at that time, the analysis showed the agri-food sector was around about $68 billion a year, or about 4% of our GDP. Today, it hasn't actually changed that much. It's about 66 billion. So that's 5 years on. Back then, it was responsible for about 13% of our merchandise exports, and similarly that hasn't changed much. Employment levels are around about the same. And look, there's a number of reasons as to why we haven't moved along much since 2014, and undoubtedly those include the impacts of drought, bushfires, a bit of a dip that I think many of us would be conscious of in food manufacturing, and of course the relative growth in other sectors during that period, so mining and resources in particular. So I think, you know, despite those sort of external factors, it is clear that a lot more needs to be done to drive the growth in agri-food if we're going to take advantage of the enormous potential that we have, the opportunity that's there because of the massive growth in food that's going to happen. We have a well-established standing as a clean, green country and a safe source of supply. And I think as countries are increasingly looking and following COVID even more so to diversify their supply chains, we're a relatively very good place to invest. Food is a hugely sensitive issue for many countries that can't be food self-sufficient and have to rely on imports to feed their populations, unlike us, where we've got access to much more productive land and agricultural know-how and expertise than we can use ourselves. So we do have a tremendous advantage that's difficult for other countries to replicate. And yeah, as I said, I think COVID only amplifies those strengths. So, you know, we've handled, you know, touch wood, as we need to do every day, as the experience in South Australia is showing us. But we are handling this crisis well, and that can set us apart in terms of realising the opportunity for food and agriculture. Because I think those countries that do manage the pandemic well will come through with even stronger reputations. So for us, we went in with one. I think we can come out with an even better one. And of course, we'll have suffered less economic damage as well because of the way we're handling this pandemic. And so therefore we will be an attractive place to invest and able to capitalise on those opportunities better. So it's a relative thing. We're also seeing that COVID is accelerating consumer demand for healthy and sustainable food products. So if you think about it, that can make our agri-food sector one of our largest sectors, I believe. So CEDA would say that the sector currently contributes around about 138 billion to the Australian economy, and that's about 7.6% of GDP when you look right across the chain, so including food and beverage manufacturing, wholesaling, retailing and services. So when you look at it in those terms, it's quite similar to some of our other large sectors like mining and construction. And CSIRO recently released some analysis that found that interest in healthy and sustainable lifestyles could be worth 25 billion and make up 10% of the value of Australia's agri-food sector by 2030. So I think if you look at CEDA's analysis and what we hear from industry, the opportunity across those markets for healthy and sustainable foods growing around about 3.6% every year in real terms, which is much faster than the industry average, which is about 2.5%. So I think that focus on health and sustainability complements very well the National Farmers Federation's strategic target for Australia's agriculture industry to reach 100 billion by 2030. So the NFF are pointing to a growth rate of approximately 4% a year expected in farm gate output. And that's a great ambition for us to have, and certainly I think an achievable one. So we have the opportunity clearly to step change our competitive position, to achieve greater global market share, to take a One Australia approach, delivering reliable product at the lowest cost, and absolutely play to our core strengths as a country, agriculture and food. That said, it's not just going to fall into our lap. We have this great competitive position, but there are plenty of other countries chasing these opportunities as well. So that leads me on to this sort of second theme around the importance of an adaptive food chain that is really absolutely hardwired with the needs of the end consumer. So we know that this tremendous growth in demand is going to happen. It's going to be driven by Asia. The region will be responsible for something like 70% of the growth in demand to 2050 and 60% of total demand. And China alone will be responsible for around about 40% of total global growth. That's about $1 trillion. And of course, it's the middle and upper class consumers, I think, that are of most interest to us. So we do have an abundance of land and resources. And I think, when you sort of look at it and think about the multiples of our population that we can feed because of those resources, it's something like 3 to 4 times our population. So say 100 million people that we can feed. And with so much demand right on our doorstep across the Asian markets, I think we're in a tremendously privileged position of being able to pick our spots. China needs to be an important part of that, and I think particularly so given how well the Chinese economy is recovering from the impacts of COVID compared to many other countries. According to the OECD, by the end of 2021, America's economy will be the same size as it was in 2019, while China's will be 10% larger. At the same time, though, of course, recent events reinforce the need to diversify our markets. With big net importers of food like India and Indonesia, we have a tremendous opportunity to show we're reliable as well as high quality and safe. And particularly as we see some major food exporters currently sort of limiting, or from time to time they do this, or banning certain exports to look after their domestic needs, such as Russia did earlier this year for grain export. In terms of food security, countries like South Korea and Japan are also really important opportunities, along with the ASEAN region broadly. And undoubtedly, there are opportunities further afield. And I think it's really, we do need to be really nuanced about this, because while, in general, consumers are increasingly looking for higher quality, healthier products, improved food safety, greater convenience, functionality, what this actually translates to on a practical level can vary considerably. Every individual country and every individual consumer segment within those countries has unique characteristics. So it's really, really important that we take a highly targeted approach to maximise value and to really capitalise on these opportunities. Depends on us developing a really deep understanding of consumers in each of these markets and aligning our supply chain all the way along to deliver the value they're looking for. I suppose I think we're getting better at this, but we probably all acknowledge that many Australian producers have a history of trying to sort of export products that are basically produced for the Australian domestic market, rather than really starting with the end consumer in that export market that they're looking at and working back from that. And I think that it's a big challenge if we really want to take full opportunity, the full opportunities that's there. We really need a detailed understanding of what consumers are looking for at a very micro level and how much they're willing to pay for it, and be prepared to add that unique value. I'll talk on that a little bit more shortly. So I think the agri-food sector, we need to continue to build our capacity, our willingness to add value to the food we produce, to adapt, to innovate, to meet the needs of consumers, and specialise in the areas where we can be really distinctive. To really have a customer-driven supply chain and create greater value here in the Australian end of the supply chain, so that we can expand the reach of our sector, create more jobs here, and improve the returns of the whole value chain, including for farmers. So the point is that our agri-food sector here in Australia, we do have finite capacity and we can't feed everyone. So the opportunity is all about matching our capacity with demand from those higher value market segments. So let me go on to those 5 themes that I think are really important for us to stay focused on to realise our full potential. And in summary, they're driving really good business engagement, attracting business investment, targeted government support, a real focus on regional Australia and growing regional Australia, and communicating effectively. So on that first theme of driving successful engagement, this is really about the point around there are so many different markets for our food exports, and we need to really understand and engage in a very targeted way. And I think there's a number of things that underpin that. One is prioritising markets. So really understanding, starting from that market, understanding its size, its potential, the consumer behaviour, the routes to market and how those operate, the distributor dynamics, as well as the competitive environment. Being super targeted about the consumers and the proposition, a very local proposition, really at quite a micro level. It might be a subcategory in a specific geographic area rather than a whole country or a broad segment. And really then creating effective sort of pull strategies that build the brand awareness and don't just try and push something at consumers, but really make it sought after. Focusing distribution to reach those consumers is incredibly important, and that might be an online and an offline strategy. We're seeing a lot of Australian companies with strong online presence in Asia, also having established flagship stores, for example, on one of the business to consumer multi-category platforms. Partnering is incredibly important. I think many companies have been using partnership growth strategies in Asia, and that's been delivering successful outcomes to speed up the process and to be able to really understand how to be effective in those countries, particularly around the distribution and routes to market, the manufacturing in country and R&D. And then really giving it organisational focus. And I know, I've worked in and seen organisations where that can be, exporting can be the sort of optional extra. There's a lack of real organisation commitment to it. So it is, if you're really going to do it well, we do need to make sure we've got the right resources, talent, and give a separate group with those meaningful resources the mandate to grow that business, rather than trying to have it as an incremental activity alongside a domestically focused business. So, obviously Asia capabilities, that's something that we talk about a lot, and with the opportunity being very concentrated, it's certainly a really important thing that we do have the relevant religious and cultural understandings, and this again is something that's got to be incredibly nuanced, an ability to negotiate across cultures. And we know we've got a long way to go. It's not only agri-food, but as Australians, that's something where we've got a long way to go. Just turning on to that second theme, which is around business investment. Significant investment is going to continue to be really important for agri-food. I think most of us would understand that that capital from overseas has been incredibly important to the growth of agriculture and agri-food more generally. And there's been a number of estimates done that put a nice round number of about $1 trillion of investment for us to realise the full potential by 2050. That's order of magnitude what's needed. So it is a capital intensive exercise, but it's capital that can be well invested and generate an attractive return. So that capital needs to come, I think, both domestically and internationally. We need to continue to be able to attract foreign investment. The lower review thresholds that are in place at the moment for foreign investment in agri-food and agriculture, I think we need to be cautious about, because they can discourage investment and send unintentionally negative signals to investors. I think agricultural investment does require patient money as well. We know that the output of agriculture, particularly farming and dryland farming, it's volatile. So it does lend itself to long-term patient capital, and I'm hopeful that we'll see more of Australia's retirement savings over time finding its way with more local investment in agricultural investment than we seem to have seen to date as well. The third theme is around government support, and I think the role of government support, particularly in helping us go beyond commodity markets, where we're obviously very successful as an exporter, is a really important one, because if we are going to move to more value-added agri-food, it's going to be innovation, that deep understanding of the consumers, and an ability to really focus on premium value-added products that will count. And we're going to need our whole supply chains to be able to work together to achieve that. So I think the government policy settings are really important here and need to support our capacity to add value, to encourage innovation and capability building, branding, and creating market structures that can build scale. And that means a business environment and regulatory settings which encourage capital investment, enable vertical integration, and support a domestic market structure which enables us to be internationally competitive. It also means a skilled and capable workforce. And, we know that we have a lot of challenges finding workers in different parts of the agri-food chain. And there's a role, I think, there for government to work closely with industry to ensure we do have a strong homegrown workforce. So skills training, innovation across a wide range of areas like farm management, research, science, marketing, finance, and even advocacy. So that is what's going to really support this shift to more added value and building on the strength in commodity markets that we already have. So I think, there's an opportunity to really continue to articulate the compelling rationale for careers in agri-food, starting with our kids and building the diversity of the workforce, more female representation, which it's happening, and it's exciting to see it happening. And we should be very excited about the progress we're making, but there's definitely more to do. There's an opportunity for government to support our cost competitiveness. So logistics costs are a big driver of the overall cost structure of getting products to destination markets, and making sure that we've got the right infrastructure, the right utilisation of that, and a regulatory regime that works is a really important role. I think some of the measures that we've seen the government introduce recently, the instant asset write-off, is a great initiative, and the inclusion of the food and beverage sector as one of the 6 priority areas in the modern manufacturing strategy is also a great step in the right direction, which will see the bulk of a $1.5 billion investment focused on helping Australian manufacturing scale up, become more competitive and resilient. The government said that it'll be soon developing a roadmap for the food and beverage sector in consultation with the industry, and we at Coca-Cola Amateur have provided a submission to that process, and that's reflected many of the themes I'm talking to today, and we're really keen to engage in that process. We see it as a really constructive thing. Another area for governments, of course, is helping to develop international markets for our food and agricultural producers. And I think we've done a lot of work as an industry to deregulate in line with national competition policy and to be consistent with our world trade obligations, to the point now where Australian farmers certainly are the most efficient and least subsidised in the world. According to AgDay, the current global levels of production and trade distorting support mean that global agricultural production and trade is lower than it could be. And that's, so global subsidies and trade barriers could be costing Australian agriculture between 8 and 10 billion in exports annually is the estimate. So it's concerning that with little progress at the World Trade Organization, these sort of global reductions in the level of production and trade distorting support seem to have stalled. The average level of support has been stable to rising even, and probably I think we can expect to see it rise even more with the introduction of measures in response to COVID-19 pandemic by a number of countries. So trade agreements between countries are really important in improving our trading conditions, reducing and eliminating tariffs, particularly as those multilateral trade institutions are finding it hard going to make progress. So, we've made some great progress as a country with a number of free trade agreements over recent years. And then, of course, the Indonesia-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement that came into force at the beginning of July. Last week's announcement that we've got 15 Asian nations signing the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the world's largest trade agreement and promises to eliminate 90% of goods tariffs over 20 years, with including some gains for agriculture. So these trade agreements will improve the competitiveness of agri-food, and I think we should be, appreciative of the government's efforts in this area, and the opportunity there is for all of us to take advantage of those, and I think really to work closely with government to realise the benefits and continue to address, of course, the non-tariff barriers which can inhibit trade. The fourth theme I wanted to touch on that I think is really important is our focus as a country on growing regional Australia. So our farmers and other agri-food sector workers and their families can benefit from improved economic conditions in their local communities, and also to help us as a country build more understanding, empathy, and attract people to regional areas. In the NFF vision for a $100 billion ag industry, it called for regional agricultural deals, which I think is a great initiative. These would see the creation of geographic zones that are not bound by state or local government boundaries, but delineated by growing environments and pathways to markets. Deals that would see the three tiers of government working together to bring strategic growth, jobs, infrastructure and investment to regions, to pinpoint hubs for focused agricultural production, infrastructure pathways to connect them, and the businesses that support it, such as road and rail, state-of-the-art ports and regional airports, making it possible for produce to be on shelf and an end destination within 24 hours or less. And these zones could be shaped around natural advantages and the already successful industries of a region, while providing valuable opportunities for educational institutions to set up bases with learning targeted to that region's industries, such as tertiary and vocational training in horticulture and irrigation. So I think there's some great stuff happening there. We've seen Infrastructure Australia add 12 new projects and initiatives, 5 new road proposals, 3 for rail, 2 for freight, public transport projects across New South Wales, Queensland and WA. But we'll need to keep investing more there to keep our regional economies growing, creating jobs and attracting investment. Technology, of course, is another consideration for growing our region. So fast, affordable connectivity so that our farmers can and these businesses can deploy state-of-the-art digital technology on farm and in marketing their produce. And then the final ingredient I'd touch on is communicating our great story effectively. And this really will help us connect consumers with food and fibre production and importantly, to secure agriculture's social licence to operate. And this is the premise behind the Telling Our Story initiative, which was launched by the NFF last year. It's an area I feel very passionate about, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be a member of the advisory committee to the NFF in relation to that initiative. Research that the NFF did in 2019 revealed some interesting findings. 63% of Australians reported having some level of disconnect with farming in regional Australia, and 58% of people claim to know only a little about farming and agriculture. I think the COVID-19 induced panic buying was a bit of a symptom of this disconnect, with many Australians having little or no idea that we produce so much more food in Australia than we can possibly consume annually, and that Australia is one of the world's most food secure nations. This disconnect has ramifications for farmers when we need to have conversations with the public about complicated issues like emissions or land and water management. And it's really important that we make sure consumers are well informed about these, because, you know, we see instances of activism on, you know, farm invasions, attacks on farmers that actually, you know, are often a long way from based on fact and hurt good farmers, and ultimately have the potential to lead to higher food costs and eat into our country's competitive advantage in export markets if left unchallenged. So, you know, some of those examples would be the potential for a rapid escalation in production costs if they were suddenly not allowed to use the weed killer, or were hit with new standards on greenhouse gas emissions or raising livestock. It's really vital that the wider Australian community backs agriculture and understands it. There's always going to be choices and trade-offs around our policies that we need to make as a country, and we need to make sure we're making the right choices and trade-offs when it comes to agri-food. I think COVID has provided a chance to have a better quality discussion with the general public about food production. In March, the Back on Track campaign was launched by the NFF to allay shoppers' fears about food shortages and inform them about our country's food production capabilities. And with some research released today, finding that COVID-19 had made 1 in 4 Australians more conscious of the origins of their food, it's important we leverage this growing interest to continue to communicate our story well. So in closing, I'd reiterate the significance of Australia's agri-food sector to our country's prosperity and the sector's enormous potential for growth. The opportunities are there for us as a nation, both now and into the future, but they won't fall into our lap. Now's the time to address the challenges, to step change our competitive position. If we didn't do that, the opportunities would be wasted and quite likely taken by others. I certainly remain very optimistic and confident, and look forward to being part of this wonderful sector for many years to come and playing my part in making it happen. Thanks for your time and the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Alison. And as I mentioned before, we do have some time for you to pose some questions to Alison. You just need to pop down to that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. So we might start with a question from Michael Wadley. So Michael says, Alison, the ag sector is dependent more than ever on exports, yet seem to have little voice in the federal discussion in Australia around the Asia, more particularly China relationship beyond basic, I should say, trade volume issues. Trade Minister Birmingham has been diligent and consistent, but this is drowned out by the foreign affairs element and the requests of the USA, which at the same time promotes America first, etc. The potential and demand for the product in the region is proven, but how do we lift our voice? And as I said, that comes from Michael Wadley, who's been a consultant to China for 20 years and is an ex-Bellamy's director.
Right. Well, it's a great question, and you know, I hesitate to because there's many knowledgeable people, and Michael himself, no doubt, one of them. But my observation would be that yes, there are. I do share the concern that that the conversation is very led perhaps by the concerns around security and the policy, strategic considerations, and I think that's incredibly important. I think though there's a really important role for business to maintain and build new bridges as part of the conversation with China as well. So I think that this can't be driven by only those sort of policy type strategic considerations. There are so many different aspects to our relationship, and we've been, there are very many good customer relationships. We've been very important trading partners for China. We've been part of the rise of their economy, and equally they've been a really important part of the rise of our economy. So I think it's incumbent on all of us in business roles to make sure that we are not stepping back, and we're not only expecting the conversation to happen through the diplomatic channels or political avenues, but we are part of that, because I think business probably, and particularly where we have those sort of mutual independencies, represents the best way of furthering relationships that we have. So I do think it's a really difficult issue, and it's a difficult time for those sectors and businesses that are just getting caught up in this tension at the moment. I think, yeah, we can't sort of end up in our corners, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I think, it's business people like us who can be part of a more moderate, nuanced solution.
We have a question from Jennifer Wainwright, Alison. It's on another issue that at times, I guess, has been slightly difficult. She's talking about a foreign investment. And she said, you discussed the importance of foreign capital and investment for the agricultural sector and how our changing regulatory landscape is moving to more restrictive and inhibitory frameworks. What do you believe we can do to lead important change on this issue at government and community levels to underwrite future opportunity?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's a really big issue as well, and I think, and the point about that Jennifer makes about community is really important as well, because I think when we look over over many decades, we've had foreign investment initially from the UK coming into agriculture. The US, we've had more recently coming in from China, and I think there's, if you actually look at the level of foreign ownership while the sources have been different over the decades, the actual percentage, certainly if you look at farming, has not actually changed that much. So there's a lot of perceptions out there, and I think a lot of our investors in agriculture and food production are very good investors. They bring in capital, which is much needed into some of these sectors that have been underinvested in, and they are very often conscious of being good members of the community. I've seen some great examples of that. So I think it is really important that not to play to the stereotypes and the fears that people have, but to point out those facts and allay some of those sort of concerns. At the same time, of course, it's really important that the processes we have through the Foreign Investment Review Board have a really important role to play, and they need to be a part of it, and to the extent that we can be, I think, consistent in how we apply them. And at the moment, there are some particular reasons why we've really reduced the threshold to 0. So, at the moment, it's a very unusual situation with the way that FIRB is operating, and hopefully we will go back to something more normal. But even so, more normal did have quite low thresholds for agricultural land and agricultural businesses. And I never felt that those thresholds really had any great logic to them when they were lowered a number of years ago. So I think it is pointing to just trying to take some of the emotion out of it, and and the facts do support the need for capital, the ability of many of these owners to be really good owners of the assets, and you can't take these assets with you, of course. And if you invest capital well, then you can create a lot of jobs and prosperity for local communities as well. So, I think it's something that we need to continue to work on. And I think it's important for us, if we sort of think about strategically the opportunity for us as a country, when a lot of, I think, post this pandemic, a lot of companies and countries are going to be thinking about diversifying their supply chains, making sure that they are investing in safe countries. We are the perfect destination for that in so many ways. So we've really got to make sure that our frameworks are predictable and certainly protect us, but are predictable, and we are a kind of a reliable place to invest and an attractive place to invest, and minimise those hurdles.
A couple more issues-based questions for you, Alison. Trent Thorne from McCullough Robertson Lawyers has said Queensland is home to the vast majority of Australia's sugar production. Coca-Cola Amatil is on the leading edge of some of the blowback, I suppose, against the consumption of sugar. How are you dealing with this significant problem and anti-sugar sentiment, given its critical importance to your core products?
All right. Okay. Well, that's a question, Trent, that we've been very focused on, and yeah, I mean, sugar, obviously, without sort of going into the whole chapter and verse, but it was very interesting when you dig in. Actually, on average, over the last 25, 30 years, sugar consumption per capita has declined quite a lot in Australia. It's more than 20% per capita. It's actually declined, including sugar-based beverages have declined. So, but at the same time, obesity has increased. So there's a lot going on, and sugar has definitely, I think, got a role to play. We definitely see lower socioeconomic and more at-risk communities tend to consume more sugar. You see massive differences in the consumption of sugar according to different communities. So it's really important to us to not to accept that we are part of the problem, and therefore to be part of the solution has been something that's really important for us. And it's actually really sensible because consumers, as I say, they are actually looking for lower sugar or no sugar alternatives anyway, a lot of them. So we've made a number of commitments and have reduced our sugar consumption. We've committed to reduce by 10% in Australia, for example, from 2015 to 2020, the sugar intensity of our beverages on average, if you like. So we're well on track for that, and then we've committed to another 10% beyond that through to 2025. And we're doing that through a bunch of different things. So really focusing, for example, our marketing on lower and no sugar products. So the growth of Coke No Sugar has been a really big driver of that. It's a great tasting product, and it's a no sugar product. We've also been able to reformulate a lot. So products like Fanta and Sprite, we've just reduced the amount of sugar in them. Some of them more gradually, some of them where we've used stevia to substitute for some of the sugar. But we've been able to reduce some of the sugar content, like in Sprite, I think we've reduced it. It's something like a third. It's quite substantial just by rethinking, reformulating, making less sweet. That's been important. Portion sizes has also been really important. So making a lot more choice around small pack sizes has been really important. So yeah, we're finding that once we've sort of applied our mind to it, we've been able to do some really good things and make a lot of progress on that agenda, and we'll really continue to work hard on that. And we try to do this very much as an industry, because we all need to do it as an industry. We think a sugar tax would be, or something like that, would be a very regressive step that would impact jobs. And so I think we're all as an industry working hard to lead and avoid that sort of the dead hand of a taxing approach which other countries have used. I think some of the work I'm most proud of is we've been doing in Indigenous communities, some of the remote Indigenous communities around where diabetes can be a real problem and sugar consumption can be a real problem. So our teams in those communities have worked with the retailers to do things like price differently. So, a Coke No Sugar will be cheaper than a regular Coke. Water, a Mount Franklin water, you'll be able to buy that for $1. In some of our areas, if you want a cold Coke, it'll be a Coke No Sugar. We won't have the regular Cokes available cold. Those sorts of just nudges, I guess, have really made a big difference. So with some of our communities, we've seen 20% reductions in their purchase of sugar beverages based on using some of those levers as well. So yeah, there's a lot happening, and we've got more to do, but we are really proud of our progress on that front.
Thanks, Alison. And I think we've got time to sneak in one more question. This one is from Mark Phelps from Queensland Country Life and Australian Community Media. Mark is also on the committee of the Rural Press Club. Hello, Mark. And Mark says, Alison, happy National Agriculture Day. As part of the step change to capitalising on the growth in food demand, does Australian agriculture and food manufacturing need to place more emphasis on having a carbon neutral production system?
Oh, Mark, thank you. That's a really hard question.
Sorry.
Look, yeah, I mean, I'm learning about this every day through our business and some of the other roles that I've played. And yes, I think we do. I think we do need to recognise that agriculture has a substantial impact on emissions and global warming, and that's a concern. And we need to, and it's a concern for, and increasingly for consumers as well, and for NGOs who are certainly in the listed company environment, we see a lot of pressure, which is, is generally a constructive thing. It sort of forces you to think differently and to find ways to, to challenge your business models. And so I do think that's going to be important. I'm keen to learn more about what those options are. There's certainly some really interesting things happening in, in agriculture, certainly, for example, around, cattle feed and I think these things will be a source of great innovation and value for us, because I think these can be another reason why our sector is distinctive and desirable from a consumer point of view as well as an investment point of view.
Alison, I think we can just sneak one more in really quickly, if that's okay with you. And it's from Matt Keeley, who says Coke has a policy to source sustainably sourced sugar. Smart Cane BMP, the cane industry sustainability program, is recognised by CCA to meet these sourcing needs. So what needs do you see for sourcing in the future, and how can they recognise Queensland growers for providing this?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's very important for us. And that's something we've worked with the Coca-Cola company hard to do, and with our farmers as well. Done a lot of work with the cane growers and they've been, they've been incredibly responsive. And I think they're actually a great example of, one of the themes I was talking about, which is just really getting the whole value chain working together and getting better understanding of the customer and the end consumer, and really making sure that our farmers are able to meet those requirements. So I think those themes will develop across other areas of agriculture and across the chain. And we certainly, in our own business now, just really responsible sourcing is a really important theme, and having processes in place that allow us to know how our suppliers' own value chain, their own sourcing practices, their own carbon emissions, their own energy and water practices. I think more and more we're going to see these sorts of approaches. So there's going to be a real opportunity for us as a country if we can continue to do those sorts of things better than others.
Alison, we'll wrap up questions there just for time purposes. But Alison, thank you so very much for joining us today. I know how extremely busy you are. You've been very generous with your time. So thank you for providing that perspective from the entire supply chain on national agriculture today. I think it's you're an ideal person to have had to join us today. If you were in person with us at Tattersalls, we would present you with a lovely gift. So we'll just have to send you something in the mail if that will suffice in this instance. But again, thank you so much for joining us. I know I speak on the behalf of everyone who's joined in acknowledging your generosity with your time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stacey, and thanks everyone.
Thanks so much. Look, before we go, I did say at the beginning that I'd let you know what we have planned for next month. And, after the rough year that 2020 has been in terms of not being able to hold in-person events, we are delighted to be able to announce that we will be holding our Rural Press Club Christmas party and presentation of our Queensland Rural Media Awards at Tattersalls in Queen Street on the evening of Wednesday, the 16th of September. So the invite went out for that yesterday. We would love to see you there to have a drink and something to eat for what's been an unusual 2020, and just also celebrate the very best rural journalists that we have here in this great state. Before we wrap up, many thanks also to our sponsors, CBRE, McCullough Robertson and Sun Super. Enormous thanks to Ashley Nolan and the team at SAS Group, although Michaela from SAS is behind the controls today. Thank you, Michaela. As always, the team at SAS have been simply top-notch in their management of our event. Thanks to our committee at the Rural Press Club as well, who nobody really gets to see given our COVID online presence, but they're busily working away behind the scenes. Mark Neville, Will Banks, Rolly Wilson, Mark Phelps, Wendy Brownscombe, Carolyn Martin, Michael Blakeney and Fran Becker. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We're also always so thankful for your support. But with that, I will wrap up so that we're dead on time at 1:30. Look forward to hopefully seeing you at the Christmas party next month, and if not, an event into 2021. So thank you, everybody. Have a lovely Friday.